The first-class cabin fell silent as every passenger watched the scene unfold. A flight attendant stood with her arms crossed, looking down at a middle-aged black man wearing a simple gray t-shirt and jeans. "Sir, I think you must be confused. This is the first-class section," she said with a condescending smile. "Economy boarding is in 30 minutes. The man remained calm, reaching slowly into his pocket. "I have my boarding pass right here," he said quietly. Several other passengers shifted uncomfortably in their seats, watching as the flight attendant snatched the ticket from his hand. "Well, there must be some mistake," she insisted, examining the ticket with exaggerated scrutiny. "We don't usually see." She paused, her lips pursed, "People like you in first class." A few gasps echoed through the cabin. The man adjusted his worn baseball cap and smiled. Not a trace of anger showed on his face, only amusement. He pulled out his phone and made a quick call. "Hello, Richard?" "Yes, it's Thomas. Listen, I'm on flight 2157 right now, and I think we need to make some changes at Sky Atlantic Airlines." "Yes, immediately." He paused, listening. "Well, considering I own 51% of the parent company, I believe that gives me the authority." The flight attendant's face drained of color as the man continued his conversation. She had just humiliated Thomas Wilson, the silent owner of not just Sky Atlantic Airlines, but a business empire worth billions. The same man who specifically chose to fly on random flights of his airline to check the service quality. Thomas ended his call and looked at the now trembling flight attendant. "We'll discuss this more after we land," he said calmly. "But for now, I would still like the glass of water I requested 10 minutes ago." The story was about to take an unexpected turn, one that would change not just this flight attendant's life, but the entire airline industry's approach to discrimination and prejudice. Few people knew that 40 years ago, Thomas Wilson was sweeping floors at the very airport where he now parked his private jet. Born in a small house in Detroit, young Thomas learned early that appearance and wealth didn't define a person's worth. His mother worked 2 jobs, cleaning houses during the day and working at a diner at night, while his father repaired cars in their small garage. Every evening, Thomas would sit by their old kitchen table, doing his homework under flickering lights, watching planes soar overhead through their cracked window. His parents had never set foot on an airplane, but they filled his head with dreams that he could touch the sky one day. At school, Thomas was always the kid with patched-up clothes and worn-out shoes. But while other kids teased him about his appearance, he spent his lunch breaks in the library, borrowing books about business and aviation. His teachers noticed his sharp mind, especially in mathematics. One teacher, Mrs. Thompson, would stay after school to help him prepare for college entrance exams. Through a combination of scholarships, loans, and working 3 part-time jobs, Thomas put himself through college. He slept only 4 hours a night, studying business during the day and working as a janitor at the local airport in the evening. The constant roar of jet engines became his motivation. After graduation, Thomas started small, very small. He noticed that airport taxi services were unreliable and expensive. With his savings of $2,000 and a beaten-up van he bought at an auction, he started an airport shuttle service. He drove 16 hours a day, 7 days a week. While other drivers treated passengers like cargo, Thomas remembered every regular customer's name and their preferred route. Within 5 years, his one-van operation grew into a fleet of 50 vehicles. But Thomas never forgot his roots. He still drove shifts himself, wearing the same simple uniform as his employees. His customers loved telling their friends about the millionaire who personally drove them to the airport. As his business grew, Thomas began buying struggling travel-related companies, turning them around by focusing on one simple principle: treat every customer like they could be a billionaire in disguise. He bought his first small airline when he was 40, transforming it from a failing regional carrier into a respected national brand. Yet success never changed Thomas's humble approach to life. He still wore his comfortable jeans and t-shirts, shopped at regular stores, and flew commercial, often in economy class, to understand his customers' experiences. His employees never knew when they might be serving their boss. The most precious lesson his parents taught him was that true character shows in how you treat others when you think they can't offer you anything in return. Now, sitting in that first-class seat while the flight attendant struggled with her embarrassment, Thomas wasn't angry. He saw an opportunity, not for revenge, but for positive change. Because sometimes, the most powerful response to prejudice isn't anger or retaliation, but peaceful transformation. Looking out the airplane window, Thomas smiled, remembering his mother's words, "Son, when they push you down, don't push back, rise higher." He had risen higher than anyone expected, but his mission wasn't complete. The incident with the flight attendant had shown him there was still work to be done. Patricia Baker never imagined she'd become the kind of person who judged others by their appearance. Growing up in a small town in Minnesota, she had dreamed of traveling the world, meeting people from different walks of life. Her childhood bedroom walls were covered with pictures of exotic destinations torn from travel magazines. 23 years as a flight attendant had slowly changed her. The bright-eyed girl who once saw adventure in every flight had been worn down by demanding passengers, long hours, and the constant struggle to make ends meet. Her salary barely covered her bills and her mother's growing medical expenses. Every month, Patricia would sit at her kitchen table, surrounded by unpaid medical bills, trying to figure out how to stretch her paycheck further. Her mother's heart condition required expensive medications, and the insurance only covered part of the costs. The stress had etched permanent worry lines around her eyes. The luxury she served in first class daily was a constant reminder of a life she could never afford. She watched as wealthy passengers complained about minor inconveniences while she worried about choosing between paying her rent or her mother's medicine. Each designer bag she helped store in the overhead compartments cost more than her monthly salary. The breaking point came 6 months ago. Her mother needed emergency surgery, but their insurance denied the claim. Patricia had begged her supervisor for extra shifts, worked during holidays, and even sold her car. Still, it wasn't enough. The hospital bills kept piling up, and the collection agency's calls became more frequent. That morning, before Flight 2157, Patricia had received another final notice from the hospital. Her hands shook as she put on her uniform, knowing she was one paycheck away from losing everything. The perfectly pressed blue uniform felt like armor, hiding her desperation behind a professional smile. She had served countless first-class passengers over the years, celebrities, executives, politicians. They all fit a certain image. When she saw Thomas Wilson in his simple clothes, something inside her snapped. All her frustrations, all her bitterness about the unfairness of life, came pouring out in that moment of prejudice. Looking back, she couldn't recognize herself in that interaction. Her parents had raised her better than that. Her father, a high school teacher, had always taught her to judge people by their character, not their clothes. He would have been ashamed of her behavior today. As the flight continued, Patricia moved through the cabin on autopilot, avoiding eye contact with other passengers. Each time she passed Thomas Wilson's seat, shame burned in her chest. She thought about her mother, who had always told her that hard times could make you bitter or better, the choice was yours. The irony wasn't lost on her, she had become exactly the kind of person she once despised. The kind who looked down on others to feel better about their own struggles. As she served drinks with trembling hands, Patricia realized she had let her circumstances change her core values. What she didn't know was that this humbling moment would become a turning point in her life. Sometimes, our worst mistakes lead to our greatest opportunities for growth. As the plane cruised at 35,000 feet, neither Patricia or Thomas realized that their paths would cross again in a way that would transform them both. The tension in first class remained thick as Flight 2157 continued its journey. Passengers kept stealing glances at Thomas Wilson, who sat quietly reading through business documents on his tablet. Some were recording discreetly on their phones, sensing a viral moment in the making. A young businessman across the aisle leaned over to Thomas. "Sir, what that flight attendant did was completely unacceptable. I have my phone recording ready if you want to post this online," he whispered. Thomas looked up from his tablet and shook his head with a gentle smile. "The world has enough viral outrage," he said softly. "Sometimes the quietest actions speak the loudest." The businessman sat back, puzzled by this unexpected response from someone who had every right to be angry. An elderly woman in the row behind Thomas reached forward and patted his shoulder. "My late husband was just like you," she said. "He became successful but never lost his humility. These days, everyone's so quick to destroy someone who makes a mistake." Other passengers shared knowing looks. They had witnessed similar scenes of discrimination before, but this was different. There was no shouting, no demands to see the manager, no threats of lawsuits. Just a calm dignity that made the flight attendant's behavior seem even more shameful by contrast. Patricia continued her duties, but her hands shook so badly she nearly spilled coffee on a passenger. Her colleague, Jenny, noticed and quietly took over her beverage service. "Take a moment in the galley," Jenny whispered. "I've got this." In the privacy of the galley, Patricia leaned against the wall, fighting back tears. Through the curtain, she could hear passengers discussing the incident in hushed tones. Someone mentioned Thomas Wilson's name, and another passenger gasped, finally recognizing who he was. "Did you know he started as a janitor?" one passenger whispered to another. "My brother works at his company's headquarters. They say he still visits the maintenance staff every week, knows everyone by name." Back in his seat, Thomas pulled out an old, worn notebook, the same one where he'd written his first business plan while working as an airport janitor. He began writing, occasionally glancing toward the galley where Patricia had disappeared. As the plane began its descent, an announcement crackled over the speakers: "Ladies and gentlemen, we're experiencing some slight turbulence. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." The irony of the announcement wasn't lost on anyone. The real turbulence had nothing to do with weather. Patricia emerged from the galley, her professional mask back in place but her eyes red-rimmed. As she walked past Thomas to check seatbelts, he looked up and caught her eye. In that brief moment of eye contact, Patricia saw something unexpected, not anger or contempt, but a hint of understanding. What the other passengers couldn't see was Thomas writing in his notebook: "Change doesn't come from punishment. It comes from transformation." Below it, he sketched out a plan that would reshape not just one flight attendant's future, but the entire airline industry's approach to human dignity. As the plane touched down, nobody realized that this flight would become a legend in the company's history, not for the incident of discrimination, but for the revolutionary changes it would inspire. The moment Flight 2157 landed, wheels hitting the tarmac with a gentle thud, Thomas Wilson's plan began to unfold. While other passengers rushed to grab their bags, he remained seated, making a series of quiet phone calls that would set things in motion. "John, call an emergency board meeting for tomorrow morning," he spoke into his phone. "And get me everything you can find about our current staff training programs." He paused, listening. "Yes, especially the sections about customer service and diversity." In the terminal, Patricia stood at the crew desk, her hands clutching her employee ID card. She had already started writing her resignation letter in her head. To her surprise, no angry managers were waiting to fire her. Instead, she received a simple message: "Report to headquarters tomorrow at 9 a.m. That evening, Thomas sat in his home office, surrounded not by luxury but by family photos and his father's old toolbox, his reminder of where he came from. His assistant had delivered the files he requested about the airline's training programs. As he read through them, he shook his head slowly. "Teaching rules isn't enough," he muttered, making notes. "We need to teach understanding." He thought about Patricia's shaking hands, recognizing the look of someone carrying heavy burdens. He'd seen that same look in his mother's eyes years ago. Meanwhile, across town, Patricia sat at her small kitchen table, bills spread out before her. Her mother dozed in the recliner nearby, oxygen tank humming softly. She picked up a hospital bill marked "Final Notice" with trembling fingers. Maybe it's better this way, she whispered to herself, expecting to be fired tomorrow. I forgot who I was up there. She looked at an old photo of herself on her first day as a flight attendant, remembering how proud she'd been to wear the uniform. Back in his office, Thomas made one final call. Dar. Sarah, I need your help with something new, he said to his company's head of employee development. What would you think about completely rebuilding our training program? Not just about procedures, but about life? The next morning, as Patricia walked into the airline's headquarters, she expected to be led to HR for termination. Instead, she found herself directed to the executive floor. Her heart pounded as she stepped out of the elevator. The wall ahead displayed the company's new mission statement, just installed overnight: every person who steps onto our planes has a story. Our job is not just to fly them safely, but to honor their journey. She was led into a large conference room where Thomas Wilson sat at the table, not in a business suit, but in the same simple clothes he'd worn on the flight. Next to him lay the worn notebook she'd seen him writing in. Please, sit down, he said kindly. We have a lot to talk about. He opened his notebook, and Patricia caught a glimpse of what he'd written. Sometimes our worst moments can lead to our greatest opportunities for change. The transformation that was about to begin would reach far beyond one airline or one incident. It would touch thousands of lives, starting with the very person who needed it most. News of changes at Sky Atlantic Airlines spread through the industry like wildfire. Over the next few months, employees watched in amazement as their company transformed from the inside out. Thomas Wilson had turned one incident into a movement. The old training center, with its outdated videos and manuals, was completely rebuilt. In its place rose the Human Connection Institute, a place where airline staff learned more than just procedures and protocols. New employees now spent their first week simply listening to stories. Today's speaker is a busy mother traveling with twins, the instructor would announce. Tomorrow, you'll hear from an elderly passenger who saved for years to visit his grandchildren. Real passengers shared real experiences, breaking down barriers and building understanding. Patricia found herself at the heart of these changes, though not in the way anyone expected. Instead of being fired, she was asked to share her story, all of it. The struggles with bills, her mother's illness, the pressure that had built up over years of service. Your story matters, Thomas had told her in that first meeting. Your mistake wasn't your final chapter, it was your wake-up call. Now help others wake up too. And so she did, becoming one of the program's most powerful speakers. The changes went deeper than just training. Thomas introduced the Walk in Their Shoes program, where executives had to regularly fly as ordinary passengers. Some traveled in wheelchairs to understand accessibility challenges. Others flew with young children to experience the struggles of traveling families. One day, a memo arrived in every employee's inbox: starting next month, Sky Atlantic will provide comprehensive medical coverage for all employees' immediate family members. Patricia read the email 3 times, tears blurring her vision. Her mother's medical bills would finally be manageable. Other airlines watched with skepticism as Sky Atlantic invested millions in what they called soft skills. But then the numbers started coming in. Customer satisfaction scores soared. Employee turnover dropped to industry record lows. The airline's reputation transformed. Media outlets picked up the story. Airline turns discrimination incident into revolution, read one headline. But Thomas refused all interviews, letting the results speak for themselves. Real change happens in quiet moments, he told his board members. In the crew lounges, something else was changing. Flight attendants from different backgrounds started sharing meals together, swapping stories about their lives. The break room walls, once bare, now displayed photos of crew members' families and achievements. One day, Patricia overheard two new flight attendants talking. "Did you hear about the flight attendant who disrespected the owner?" one asked. "I heard she still works here." "Yeah," the other replied. "They say she's the one who helped design our new training program. Something about how we all deserve second chances." Patricia smiled to herself, straightening her uniform before heading to her next flight. On her lapel gleamed a new pin that all Sky Atlantic employees now wore. It read simply, "Every journey matters." The airline industry had always measured success in numbers, passenger counts, on-time departures, profit margins. But in conference rooms across the country, executives were starting to ask different questions. What is Sky Atlantic doing differently? How have they turned kindness into profit? 6 months after the incident, Patricia stood nervously outside Thomas Wilson's office, holding a thick folder. The secretary smiled and nodded for her to enter. Inside, Thomas wasn't sitting behind his massive desk but in one of the comfortable chairs by the window, still wearing his signature casual clothes. "Patricia, how is your mother doing?" he asked warmly, gesturing for her to sit. Since the new medical coverage began, her mother's health had improved significantly, having access to better treatments and medications. "She's doing much better, sir. The new heart medication has made a real difference," Patricia replied, her voice filled with gratitude. "Actually, that's partly why I'm here today." She opened her folder, revealing dozens of handwritten letters. "These are from flight attendants across the country," she explained. "They all have similar stories: family medical issues, financial struggles, feeling trapped. Your changes at Sky Atlantic have inspired them, but they can't afford to leave their current airlines to join us." Thomas leaned forward, his eyes showing interest. "What are you suggesting?" He had learned that some of the best ideas came from employees who understood ground-level challenges. Patricia took a deep breath. "I've developed a proposal. What if we created a program to help other airlines adopt our training and benefits system? We could license our Human Connection Institute curriculum. It's not just about competition, it's about changing the entire industry." Thomas picked up one of the letters, reading it quietly. It was from a flight attendant at another airline, describing how she'd been forced to choose between buying groceries or her son's asthma medication. "You know," Thomas said thoughtfully, "when I started buying airlines, I thought I was in the transportation business. Then I realized I was in the people business. Now I'm thinking we might be in the transformation business." Over the next hour, Patricia presented her detailed plan. She'd spent months working on it during her free time, gathering data, creating budgets, and outlining implementation strategies. Her hands shook slightly as she walked Thomas through each section. "This could work," Thomas said finally, closing the proposal. "But it needs someone to lead it, someone who understands both the problem and the solution from personal experience." He looked at Patricia meaningfully. "Sir?" Patricia's eyes widened as she realized what he was suggesting. "How would you like to head up our new industry transformation division?" Thomas asked. "Your story, your experience, and now this proposal, you've earned it." Patricia sat in stunned silence. 2 years ago, she was drowning in bills and bitterness. 6 months ago, she'd committed the biggest mistake of her career. Now she was being offered a chance to help change the entire airline industry. "Sometimes," Thomas said gently, "our deepest wounds become our greatest gifts to others. Your experience that day on the plane, it wasn't just about learning what not to do. It was about understanding why people do what they do, and how to help them change." As Patricia left the office that day, she passed the company's mission statement on the wall. Below it, workers were installing a new line of text: because every person who helps others fly deserves to soar themselves. The transformation that had begun with one humbling moment on Flight 2157 was about to reach new heights, touching lives far beyond the walls of Sky Atlantic Airlines. 1 year after Flight 2157, Thomas Wilson stood on a stage in a packed convention center. Behind him, a banner read, "Aviation Industry First, the Dignity Initiative." Representatives from over 50 airlines worldwide filled the audience. "Change doesn't start in boardrooms," Thomas began, dressed in his usual casual attire. "It starts in moments when we choose to see each other as human beings." He gestured to Patricia, who walked onto the stage to a round of applause. The Industry Transformation Division had exceeded all expectations. 10 major airlines had already signed up for the Human Connection Institute's training program. But today's announcement would take things further. Today, Sky Atlantic is pledging $5 billion to create the Aviation Dignity Fund, Thomas announced. This fund will help airlines worldwide provide better healthcare for their employees, improve training, and support for staff facing personal hardships. In the audience, airline executives whispered among themselves. This wasn't just corporate social responsibility, this was a complete reimagining of how the industry treated its workers. Patricia stepped up to the microphone, her confidence now matching her passion. "A year ago, I was that flight attendant who judged someone by their appearance. Today, I run a division that helps prevent others from making the same mistake. But this isn't just about avoiding discrimination, it's about creating an environment where everyone can thrive." She shared stories from airlines that had adopted their program. A ground crew member who no longer had to choose between rent and medicine. A flight attendant who could finally afford therapy. A baggage handler whose child's college tuition was now covered by improved benefits. "The numbers don't lie," Thomas added, showing slides of data. Airlines that invested in their people saw a 40% reduction in employee turnover, 60% increase in customer satisfaction, and yes, a 25% increase in profits. Dignity isn't just right, it's good business. The real surprise came when Thomas unveiled the Sky Atlantic Scholarship. Every year, 20 children of airline industry workers would receive full college scholarships. "Because every dream deserves a chance to take flight," he explained. After the presentation, a reporter asked Thomas why he hadn't fired Patricia after the incident. Thomas smiled, looking at Patricia, who was now surrounded by airline executives eager to implement her program. "In business, we talk about ROI, return on investment," he said. "But what about ROC, return on compassion? When you give people a chance to transform their mistakes into wisdom, the returns are infinite." As the day ended, Patricia found a quiet moment with Thomas. "You know, that day on the plane, I thought I was meeting the owner of an airline," she said. The Aviation Dignity Fund would go on to change countless lives, creating a ripple effect that reached far beyond the airline industry. It showed that one moment of humiliation, handled with grace and wisdom, could transform into a movement of dignity and hope. Copy retry. 5 years after Flight 2157, Thomas Wilson celebrated his 65th birthday not in a lavish hotel, but in the main crew lounge at Sky Atlantic's headquarters. Flight attendants, pilots, baggage handlers, and ground crew gathered around a simple cake, singing "Happy Birthday" to the man who had changed their lives. Patricia, now a senior vice president, presented him with a special gift, a leather-bound book filled with thousands of letters from airline workers across the globe. Each page told a story of transformation, lives changed, dignity restored, dreams achieved. "Remember when I judged you by your clothes?" Patricia said, addressing the crowd. "Today, we judge each other by the kindness in our actions." That's Mr. Wilson's true legacy. The Aviation Dignity Fund had grown beyond anyone's expectations. Over 200 airlines worldwide had adopted their training program. The industry, once known for stress and burnout, was transforming into a model of compassionate capitalism. Thomas picked up the book, running his hand over its cover. "You know what my mother used to say?" he asked the gathered crowd. "She said, success isn't about rising above others, it's about lifting others as you rise. I didn't build this alone. We built it together." He shared a story he'd never told before. "The day of Flight 2157, I wasn't testing the service. I was flying to visit my old neighborhood, where I used to sweep floors. I still go there every month to talk to young kids about their dreams. That's why I dress this way, to show them you don't need expensive clothes to have dignity." The Human Connection Institute had become a case study at major business schools. But more importantly, it had become a model for other industries. Healthcare companies, hotel chains, and retail corporations were all adopting similar programs. As Thomas prepared to cut his cake, a young flight attendant trainee raised her hand. "Sir, what's the most important lesson you've learned through all of this?" Thomas thought for a moment, looking around at the faces in the room, faces of people who had become family. That our worst moments can become our finest hours if we choose growth over bitterness, understanding over judgment, and lifting up over putting down. Patricia added, "And that sometimes, the person who seems least likely to change your life becomes the one who transforms it completely." The story of Flight 2157 is still shared in every new employee orientation at Sky Atlantic Airlines. But it's no longer just about a flight attendant who judged wrongly or a billionaire who responded with grace. It's about how one moment of humility and wisdom can spark a movement that changes countless lives. As Thomas looked at his simple birthday cake, surrounded by people from all walks of life, he smiled. His greatest achievement wasn't the billions he'd earned or the airlines he'd bought. It was the dignity he'd helped restore to an industry, one person at a time. The cake was cut, pieces passed around on paper plates. In that moment, no one saw a billionaire or employees, just people sharing a celebration of how far they'd come together, and the countless lives they'd continue to touch through the power of compassion and second chances.